Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Unfiltered, you guys. And all right, today we are going to be talking about why charismatic, modern charismatic leaders would have most likely rejected Paul the Apostle, right? Okay, so I want you guys to imagine the Apostle Paul walks into a modern charismatic church, right? He's got no flashy suit, no hype, no fire. He's just got scars and weakness and a message about Christ crucified, right? Would he even be invited on stage, do you think? I don't think so. See, the truth is, Paul was accused of being too weak, too unimpressive, and not powerful enough, you guys. Yeah, I'm dead serious about that, right? And yet he was one of the greatest servants of God in history. See, today we need to ask if Paul himself wouldn't fit the mold of modern charismatic leaders. What does that say about the mold itself, you guys? I don't know about you, but it says that the mold is probably has been distorted, right? I don't know. Anyway, so before we get any deeper into this, I just want to touch really quick on this idea of the power of God, right? So how do we figure out what the power of God is in the first place? For that, we have to go to the Bible, you guys. So we're going to head on over to the Bible, or at least a digital Bible. All right. And so the reason I want to do this is because we see so much it's power and fire, more power, more fire, right? And I just want to talk, I think that the word power really it just really screws people's interpretation of, what God's power actually is. So we're going to look at a couple verses out of the Bible here that explain what the power of God is. So if we look at Romans 1:16, you guys, we see Paul, oddly enough, saying, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is" what? "The power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." Right? The gospel is the power of God, you guys. All right. So let's look at 1 Corinthians 1:18, right? Paul says again, "For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness," right? "But unto us which are saved," what? What does it say? "It is the power of God." See, the preaching of the cross is the power of God. The preaching of the gospel, you guys. That's the power of God. "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for the gospel is the power of God." That's what it is. These crazy pastors out here, man, in these charismatic churches, it's just all about power, but they equate signs and wonders and stuff, right? So let's take a look at modern pastor, verse Paul, right? In 2 Corinthians chapter 10 through chapter 12, Paul addresses, gosh, I can't speak today, the so-called super apostles, you guys, right? And that was a sarcastic term, by the way. So, there we go again. So let's look at 2 Corinthians 10:10. We see Paul saying, "For they say his letters are weighty and strong." So Paul says, "For they say." Who's he talking about? He's talking about these super apostles. "For they say." And then it's in quotes, right? It says, his letters are weighty and strong. Who's his letters? Paul's letters. These super apostles were saying, his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech of no account. Let such a person understand that what we say by letter when absent, so end quote, what we say by letter when absent, we do when present. Not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, right? But when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. You see, what do we see in the modern charismatic churches, you guys? And it's not just the charismatic churches, but it's like really prevalent for the most part in them. We see people commending themselves, right? We see them comparing themselves with one another. It's like, oh, this guy's did this guy did this, right? So let's keep going here. Verse 13, but we will not boast beyond limits, but will boast only with regard to the area of influence God assigned to us, to reach even to you. For we are not overextending ourselves, as though we did not reach you. For we were the first to come all the way to you with the gospel of Christ. So what were they the first to do? What did they come with? They didn't come with power and signs and wonders. They came with the gospel of Christ. We do not boast beyond limit in the labors of others. Like all these guys out here talking about, I went and this guy did a healing, and then I saw this guy over here doing a healing, and then, he travels across the world doing healings and stuff. They boast beyond limit in the labors of others. But our hope is that your faith increases. Our area of influence among you may be greatly enlarged, so that we may preach the gospel in lands beyond you. Not so that we could do signs and wonders. Not so that we could speak in tongues. None of this stuff. Without boasting of work already done in another's area of influence. There's that boasting on other people's work, other people's healings, what other people's ministries are doing, right? As far as the healings and the signs and the wonders and stuff. The works. Okay, for it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. And then we go into this false apostle here. I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me, he says. For I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. But I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. See, that's what's happening in these charismatic churches a lot today, is that people have a sincere and pure devotion. They just want to know Jesus, but they're led astray by that. See, they're deceived because of that, because these people come speaking smooth words and trying, signs and wonders and healings and all this stuff that sounds great. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus, which is what the Jesus these people preach is, he is another Jesus. And Paul affirms here, there is another Jesus that can be proclaimed, you guys. There is another Jesus that can be proclaimed, not one. There are fake Jesuses that are pushed in these churches than the one we proclaim. So it's a different one from the one we proclaimed with the gospel. It's one that says signs and wonders, right? Or if you receive a different spirit from the one you receive. So there is a different spirit that we can receive from the one you received. Or if you accept a different gospel, there is also a different gospel. And notice how he says, not a different message, not a different teaching. It's a different gospel. It's a different good news, right? The gospel means good news. It's a different good news, not the one that Paul preaches, not the gospel of Christ, not the good news of his sacrifice. but a gospel of signs and wonders and power. You put up with it readily enough. See, these people put up with it. They don't even out of their sincere intentions. Indeed, I consider that I am not in the least inferior to these super apostles or charismatic leaders out here laying hands on everybody and, with the big website selling books and stuff, right? Even if I am unskilled in speaking, I am not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way, we have made this plain to you in all things. He goes on, Paul goes on to talk about this. This whole idea, right? These men boasted in strength, eloquence, visions, and power, you guys. See, all the healings they or someone else they know has done wherever they go, they looked impressive, these people did. There's the super apostles, the super preachers, the power, right? They mocked Paul as weak. They called him, he was unimpressive in speech and always suffering, right? Yet Paul flips the script, you guys. See, true ministry isn't about outward power, but about weakness that magnifies Christ's power, right? We see this in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Verse 10, for the sake of Christ, then I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul tells us that this is demonstrated through faithfulness, endurance, suffering, and service. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23, right? So if we look at that, we see, are the servants of Christ? Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I am talking like a madman with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, and often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness. Sounds like a song, right? Danger at sea, danger from false brothers. In toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure, and apart from other things. There's the daily pressure on me, my anxiety for all the churches. You see, even Paul had anxiety, you guys. So that, it's funny that, a lot of these people preach, oh, you can be freed from all this stuff. Well, why wasn't Paul? But right, we see that, right? In other words, the Corinthians were drawn to flashy leaders, you guys. But Paul insisted that Christ-like humility and suffering, not charisma and spectacle, mark a true servant of God. You see, if Paul himself, arguably the most influential apostle, was mocked as weak, unpolished, and unimpressive, how does that square with today's self-proclaimed apostles who flaunt power, titles, and constant signs and wonders, you guys? Paul went through and spoke about suffering, hardship, imprisonment, shipwrecks, poverty, weakness. Modern charismatics preaching? Well, when they preach, it's all about them, right? They boast in influence, prosperity, flashy conferences, and fire, healing, self-edification through tongue speaking, to name a few. But Paul says, when I am weak, then I am strong. In 2 Corinthians 12:10, you guys. Modern pastors preaching about fivefold ministry say, when I am powerful, then God is with me. It's in complete opposition to what Paul preached. Where is the humility, right? So let's take a quick look at the difference between the charismatic model and Paul's model of ministry, right? In the modern charismatic model, we have power projected, more fire, more anointing, greater power. Paul's model of ministry, weakness displayed. When I am weak, then I am strong. Modern charismatic model, boasts in success, conferences, book sales, big stages, prosperity. Paul's model, boasts in suffering, shipwrecked, beaten, imprisoned, sleepless, and hungry, right? Charismatic model, charismatic presence and eloquence, right? Smooth talkers, they're hype-driven preaching. Unimpressive appearance and speech in Paul's model, his bodily presence is weak and his speech is of no account, they said. The charismatic model authenticates ministry by signs, wonders, and manifestations. The falling, shaking, fire tunnels, etc., tongue speaking. Paul authenticates ministry by endurance and faithfulness in 2 Corinthians 6, 4 through 10, which is just more about toiling and hardship. In the charismatic model, they seek to be served. They have an elevated status, VIP treatment, luxury lifestyle, right, you guys? Paul's model serves sacrificially. I will most gladly spend to be spent for your souls. And last, in the modern charismatic model, draws attention to themselves, personal branding, my ministry, my anointing. Paul's ministry points away from himself. What we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord in 2 Corinthians 4:5, you guys. So what's the danger of a power-centered ministry, right? Well, when churches cry out for more fire, more power, more signs and wonders, they risk falling into the same trap as the Corinthian church did, idolizing spectacle over substance, you guys. Paul warned that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 14, and his servants as servants of righteousness. In other words, impressive signs don't validate the pastor or the speaker. Jesus himself warned in Matthew 24:24 that false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect, you guys. That's you. So if we turn God's power into trivial things like signs and wonders as the proof of a ministry, as the proof that a ministry is true and right in its teaching, we flipped the gospel completely upside down, you guys. Paul deliberately highlights what today's pastors avoid. Humility. He said they avoid humility. He says, we are fools for Christ's sake in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 10. Weakness. We have this treasure in clay and jars of clay, 2 Corinthians 4:7. Suffering. I bear on my body the marks of Jesus in Galatians 6, verse 17. If someone today claims to be a pastor but isn't willing to suffer, be rejected, and lose status for Christ, Paul would say they don't resemble a true pastor at all, you guys. So here's the heart of it. The fact that Paul himself, with all the real authority of a true apostle, was dismissed as weak proves that biblical ministry was never about spectacle, signs and wonders, or outward power. If the Corinthians thought Paul was too weak to be a true minister, the modern charismatic leaders who equate power, hype, and success with God's favor would have definitely dismissed Paul as disqualified, you guys. If the leaders in the Corinthian church couldn't stomach Paul's weakness, what do you think they would do with Jesus, who went to the cross in apparent weakness? All right, you guys, I love you. Come back, hit that like and subscribe button if that helped with anything. We got more to come. Have a good day. Peace.